This is the road to Chernobyl. It's 30 years since a reactor exploded at the nuclear power plant here, the worst nuclear accident in history. The disaster threw radioactive fallout across a huge area. It affected 3 million people and forced the evacuation of over 300,000. Around the reactor, Soviet authorities sealed off an 18-mile exclusion zone deemed too dangerous for humans to inhabit. A radioactive wilderness, people here call it the zone. We're approaching the edge of it. You can see the checkpoint up ahead. Once you enter the zone, you have to pass through radiation checks. We're in a queue for one now. You're scanned every time you enter a building. You stand in the scanner. The lamps on the right flash clean or dirty if you've been contaminated. We're driving towards the station itself now, towards the destroyed Reactor 4. All around it are construction sites abandoned after the accident. We're about 500 meters from the destroyed reactor. You can see it straight ahead, the brown building with the smokestacks. It's sealed in what's called the sarcophagus, a giant metal and concrete shell. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet workers were exposed to very high levels of radiation while building it. The sarcophagus, though, is collapsing. That's why there's this huge structure above us called the new safe confinement. It's a massive new shell that's going to be wheeled across the entire reactor building ahead of us. It's the biggest movable structure ever built. Surprisingly, the level of radiation here is low, similar to that in New York or other big cities. The radioactive materials are carried by wind, and so it can be hard to predict where will be most contaminated. This is Pripyat, the town closest to the reactor, which was evacuated one day after the accident. The town's 30,000 people never returned. Everything was just left as it was in 1986. The town is frozen in the Soviet Union. Look up and you can see a Soviet hammer and sickle on the roof of the abandoned building. Along the roof of the building straight ahead, the sign says the Soviet slogan, "Let the atom be a worker and not a soldier." Nadezhda Makarevich was living in Pripyat on the night of the explosion. After the evacuation, she now lives in Kiev.
Это было райское место. Это был город детей и цветов. Он мертвый.
Soviet authorities initially tried to hide the disaster. Even people in Pripyat were told nothing until a day later. During that delay, Nadezhda's lungs were burned by radioactive dust. Her son also has serious health problems. This is a kindergarten. The children's toys are still there on the bed to your right. Someone's put gas masks on them. People still work in the zone, almost 4,000 in fact. Most are constructing the huge new confinement shell. Others monitor what's left of the reactors. Many work in these offices that overlook the station itself. Tons of radioactive waste from Chernobyl still have to be removed. A US company will transport it here. We're entering what's called the hot room, where it will be processed. It will still take 100 years for the waste to become safe. When you leave the zone, all vehicles are scanned for radiation. You can see this guard taking readings. Even after 30 years, the effects of the catastrophe are still seriously disputed. The UN's found that besides those exposed immediately after the accident, there's no evidence to suggest Chernobyl has had a major impact on public health. But local doctors and researchers insist that they are recording many serious long-term health problems here, especially among children. Life here is like going back 80 years ago. People eke out a living on their own tiny plots of land, some travelling by horse and cart, like the one coming towards you. The biggest danger comes from long-term exposure by eating food from this area. People like Anna, though, are so poor that they have no choice. They have to eat what they grow, even though these are the things most likely to be contaminated.
Ну, звісно, що переживаємо. Чи вона опасна, чи не опасна, чи є там радіація, чи немає, ми мусимо їсти, бо в нас нема за що, щоб купити щось друге. Що є, тим і пользуємося.
The UN has recorded 6,000 children with thyroid cancer linked to radiation from Chernobyl. Local researchers here say most children are sick. But due to Ukraine's economic crisis, the government recently cancelled free school meals here. They were the only definitely uncontaminated food they got.
Ну, раніше ж, як провіряли радіацію, де все, так він же був загрязнений, це з час його вже він очистився, щоб нам не давати нічого. А так, я знаю. У нас район невеликий, і на наш район ніхто внимання не обращає.
The government says it's doing its best with limited resources. As outward signs of the disaster fade, those living close to it say they feel the government is waiting to forget them. 30 years on, the area around Chernobyl is still contaminated with fear.
Звісно, що думаємо. Думаємо і о Чорнобилі, і часто думаємо, як діти боліють, то й часто думаєш, що додумається про Чорнобиль, чого ж не думаю.
Patrick Revel, ABC News, Pripyat, Ukraine.